Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Hugh McKay and I'm president of the board of directors of the City Club. As a 12-year-old volunteer for Richard Nixon's presidential campaign, today's speaker, Grover Norquist, got the bright idea that the Republican Party needed to brand itself and market itself just like Coca-Cola might. The brand needed to be grounded in fighting taxes. Thus, a Republican voting for a tax increase would be hurting the brand just like a rat head in a Coke bottle would hurt the Coke brand. With this vision, he's a man of vision. Grover Norquist founded Americans for Tax Reform in 1986, and after Bill Clinton was elected president in 1992, Mr. Norquist began hosting a weekly gathering of conservatives in his Washington office. Mr. Norquist's Wednesday meeting is now a powerful forum for elected officials, political activists, and conservative thought leaders. As president of Americans for Tax Reform, Mr. Norquist instituted the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which asks all candidates for state and federal office to oppose all tax increases. Mr. Norquist has gotten 98% of House Republicans and nearly 90% of Senate Republicans, and all the candidates for the Republican nomination except John Huntsman to take this pledge. On the state level, 13 governors and 1,200, roughly 1,249 to be exact, state legislators have taken the Norquist Pledge. This past summer, when the so-called Super Committee tried to reach a compromise solution on debt reduction, Mr. Norquist was widely viewed as the driving force behind the hard line taken by the committee Republicans, all of whom had taken the Norquist Pledge. Mr. Norquist's remarkable influence has made him a lightning rod for praise and for criticism. Newt Gingrich says Grover Norquist is, quote, the most innovative, creative, courageous, and entrepreneurial leader of conservative grassroots activism in America. He has truly changed American history. P.J. O'Rourke says Grover Norquist is Tom Paine crossed with Lee Atwater, plus just a soupçon of Madame Defarge. Senator Mitch McConnell has said Mr. Norquist is key to why, quote, the conservative movement is so vibrant today and why liberals who thought they had taken over are on the run. Meanwhile, Arianna Huffington calls Mr. Norquist, quote, the dark wizard of the right's anti-tax cult. And Republican stalwart Alan Simpson, who spoke here at the City Club recently, declared that Grover Norquist may be, quote, the most powerful man in America, unquote. Senator Simpson goes on to say that Mr. Norquist is, quote, a megalomaniac, unquote. So you win some and you lose some. Mr. Norquist holds a BA and MBA in economics, both from Harvard University, serves on numerous national boards, and has contributed numerous publications and has authored 2 books. And he was featured just last month on 60 Minutes. Mr. Norquist has said that he wants to shrink government, quote, down to the size where we can drown it in the bathtub, unquote. Please welcome to the City Club, Grover Norquist.
Thank you. Delighted to be here in Cleveland. The next 10 years are going to decide what direction the country goes in for a long time. One vision put forward by Obama, Reid, and Pelosi in the modern Democratic Party has us moving towards a European social welfare state with not 20% of the national economy consumed by the state, but more towards 40%. The alternative vision, the Reagan Republican vision, is to not move down that path, but move instead to a more limited size of government. And those 2 visions are in conflict. There isn't some compromise. It is not somebody wants bigger, somebody wants smaller. Well, let's compromise. Really? What would that be? Somebody wants to go east, somebody wants to go west. What would a compromise look like? So we really are going to decide over the next decade which direction we're heading in, and I think that we will head dramatically and for quite some time in whichever direction we pick. Now, in understanding the fight, in the last year's fight about whether to raise taxes or reduce spending was the first Lexington and Concord battle of that fight. the modern Democratic Party said, well, we've taken spending from 20% of GDP, the sort of last 20 to 30-year average, up to 25 in 3 years. Now, you Republicans get cracking and go raise money to tax dollars to bring taxes up to our spending levels. And the Republican response was, no, no. You see, you bring spending down to what the Americans are willing to pay. And the fight was, do we raise taxes to pay for the size of government that Obama envisions, or bring the size of government down to what the American people are willing to tolerate and have worked with over the last decades? And that's the argument. That's the fight. And there's a lot of money on the table. So some of the grumpy people who are unhappy they didn't get a $2.5 trillion tax increase have a reason to be grumpy. They may have to go get jobs. If you want to understand not only sort of the two directions that the political tendencies want to move into, I think it's important also to understand the politics behind it, the mechanics. In the United States, we have had two parties for a long time. But for many, many years, the two parties were simply regional parties. If somebody told you 50 years ago they were Republican, you knew they were born north of the Mason-Dixon line. And you didn't know very much else about them. You didn't know whether they wanted to raise taxes or spend more money or annex Canada or anything. They just were born north of the Mason-Dixon line. And if they were a Democrat, you knew they were born south of the Mason-Dixon line. And, of course, various waves of immigrants would come into the country over time, and the person who was mean to them when they showed up at the port, they'd go with the other party. So not exactly a terribly rational way to pick up teams if you're trying to govern the most powerful nation in the world. We had little old ladies in Mississippi who were agreeing with Ronald Reagan on everything and voting for George McGovern because Sherman had been mean to Atlanta recently. And we had little old ladies in Maine who agreed with McGovern on everything and voted for Ronald Reagan because the guy at Little Round Top was from Maine, which is, again, not exactly a reasonable way. And, of course, then everything was bipartisan. One of the things I find most intriguing is people in D.C. Why have we lost bipartisanship? This is such a tragedy. And I think to myself when somebody says that they miss bipartisanship and they considered it preferable to partisan battles, my thought is that person is very old. Because 50 years ago, 40 years ago, every fight had the liberal Republicans and the liberal Democrats fighting against the conservative Republicans and conservative Democrats. So every fight was bipartisan because the fights they were based on ideology or worldview, but the two parties didn't tell you anything or very much about where somebody wanted to go. It was during the lifetime of Ronald Reagan that the two parties did sort themselves out. If you want more limited government, you're a Republican. If you have a more expansive view of the power and the size and the scope of government and the decisions of your life that it should be making for you, you tend to be a Democrat. And the two parties have sorted themselves out so that you do know a lot about somebody if they introduce themselves and tell you they're a Republican or Democrat. You can, with pretty good certainty, answer an awful lot of questions about what political views that person has. And that means that in the fight between a European-sized social welfare state versus a more traditional American limited government society, the two parties are heading in opposite directions. And so the size and health of the parties also tells you about the direction that the country is likely to go in. The fight we just had over spending too much, I think can best be understood if you remember the makeup of the two parties. I'll walk through the center-right, the modern Reagan Republican Party, and the Democratic Party. And we actually have a meeting in Washington, D.C. That was referenced about this size and about this shape room, where we put 150 to 180 people every Wednesday for an hour and a half from the broad center-right coalition talk about what we're doing. There's similar meetings, one led here by Jack Boyle in Cleveland, 3 in Ohio, and 1 in each of the states except South Carolina and South Dakota, long story, where the center-right gets together on a regular basis. So if you were to have the modern Republican Party sit around a table, who's there? Every group is there because on the issue that moves their vote, not all issues, the issue that moves their vote, what they want from the government is to be left alone. Taxpayers, don't raise my taxes. They're not asking you to raise other people's taxes. The Second Amendment community. I serve on the board of the National Rifle Association. And the NRA simply wishes people to be left alone with their Second Amendment rights. They do not knock on your door on Friday afternoon and urge you to be a hunter. They don't tell you should go out and buy guns. They do not require that every fourth grade child in public school be taught books entitled Heather Has Two Hunters. They just want to be left alone. Okay, the homeschooling movement. Just 2 million people who homeschool just want to homeschool. They're not asking other people to homeschool. They want to be left alone to do that. The small business community, the self-employed people, entrepreneurs, professionals, people for whom the most important thing is practicing their professional lives and not being regulated or taxed out of existence. The property rights movement and the religious liberty movement, those people, those communities of faith, those people for whom the most important thing in their life is practicing their faith and transmitting it to their kids, they wish to be left alone to do that. And that's why the Republican right has got evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, and Mormons who do not agree who gets to heaven or how, but they do understand that if they're to be left alone to get to heaven, all the other guys have got to be left alone to go straight to Hades because they completely misunderstand Scripture. Around the center-right table, you've got the guy who wants to make money all day, and he looks across the table at the guy who wants to go to church all day, and he says, that's not how I spend my time. But it's not necessary that they both agree how they spend their liberty. It's just necessary they both agree that everybody should be left alone. They both look over at the guys who wants to fondle his guns all day, and they say, that's not what we do with our time. Again, the center-right works, and it's a low-maintenance coalition because there's no conflict within the parts of the movement on primary vote-moving issues. Get to secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and whatever 5 is issues, and you can have all sorts of debates on talk radio where people can argue about various things that they don't vote on. I used to find that very interesting when I was younger. I'm much more interested in making sure everybody on their central vote-moving issue is where they need to be at the table, and then if people want to later have conversations about secondary issues, that's fine. But again, vote-moving issues matter. Everything else is polite dinner conversation or impolite dinner conversation. That's the center-right, and I got a call when Hillary Clinton was running for president. A New York reporter had said, Hillary just gave a speech up in New York and said what the progressives need, they used to be liberals, now they're progressives, what progressives need is a meeting like Grover runs. And the reporter said, what do you think of that? And I explained how our center-right movement works, how the modern Reagan Republican movement works. It holds together because people with very radically different concerns in life all agree they want the government to leave them alone in their zone, and that means everybody else who wants a more limited government is an ally, and they vote for the same candidates. They may not do anything other than show up every 2 years together and vote for the same guy or lady every 2 years. They may not bowl together, they may not hang out, they may not live in the same neighborhoods, they certainly don't go to the same churches, but they show up every 2 years, vote for the same guy. And I said that Hillary's party, the Democratic Party, has a challenge in keeping their coalition together. And that is that the modern Democratic Party, if you were to sit around Hillary's table, Barack Obama's table, the modern Democrat Party's table, you have trial lawyers, paying customers, trial lawyers, labor union leaders, the big city political machines, government workers' unions, the 2 wings of the dependency movement, people who are locked into welfare dependency, and people who make $90,000 a year, managing the dependency of other people, making sure none of them get jobs and become Republicans. Then you have all of the coercive utopians. These are the people who get government grants to tell the rest of us how to run our lives. These are the people who mandated cars too small to put your entire family into, the people who designed and mandated the toilets that don't flush completely, the people who designed the light bulbs that convince you have glaucoma, and on the Sabbath, you have to separate the green glass from the white glass from the brown glass for the recycling priests. And they have an entire list of things that you have to do or that you're not allowed to do that is slightly longer and more tedious than Leviticus. So around the left's table, it can work together as long as we are stupid enough to keep throwing money into the center of the table. Okay? As long as there's cash, then everyone around the left's table can get along the way they do in the movies after the bank robbery. One for you, one for you, one for you. Everybody's happy. That's what the stimulus package was, $800 billion of let's keep everybody happy around the table. But over the last 2 years, the $800 billion sort of dwindled down, got spent. And if the Republicans hold, as they have been, and say no new taxes, and mean it, and put their foot on the air hose, and do not throw more money into the center of the table, then everyone around the left's table begins to look at each other and the guy sitting next to them a little bit more like the second to the last scene in those lifeboat movies. Now we're wondering who to throw overboard or who to eat. And if we don't let them gnaw on taxpayers, they'll just as cheerfully gnaw on the guy sitting next to them. So if you want to know what the modern Republican Party will do, it will work not to throw more money in the center of the table so that the conflicts in the left become more acute. Because, again, all of the spending interests, the takings coalition, people who view the proper role of government as taking things from some people and giving them to others, frequently cash, frequently them, that coalition is not made up of friends and allies. It is made up of competing parasites. And again, they don't like the guy next to him, and if there's not enough, they'll turn on him. So those are the two competing coalitions, and they'll tell you what the two parties will do. If you want, I mean, one of the things you find out when you do polling is that if you have $5,000 worth of stock, like a 401k or an IRA, it makes you 18% more Republican, less Democrat. This is true for men, women, government employees, private sector employees, all ages, all incomes. High-income people who are in the stock market are more Republican. Low-income people, somewhat in the stock market, are more Republican. Makes you more Republican at every level to be a share owner. And the number of people who are share owners have gone from about 8% in 1960 to 50 to 60% now. And you can actually chart the strength of the modern Republican Party and that tendency and explain a lot of the growth there. That's an important project, and it explains why the Republican solution to every problem is a health savings account, a personal savings account, an educational savings account, a homeowner savings account, a 401k. Why? They want more people to be share owners in the country. The modern Democratic Party has polled and says if you're a government worker, you're 10% more likely to be a D than an R. Hold that job for 30 years, and you're 30% more likely to be a D. Makes more than $75,000 a year, and you're 30% more likely to be a D. This is why the Democrat solution to every problem is 100,000 more postal workers, teachers, government employees, creates more Democrats. You can sort of figure out where these guys are going, and partly driven by who their coalitions are. In Washington, D.C., the introduction pointed out that I created the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. The pledge was put together in '86. The Reagan White House put together Americans for Tax Reform, asked me to run it, and I created the Taxpayer Protection Pledge to protect the lower marginal tax rates that came out of the Reagan tax reform of '86. Remember, Reagan got in office, top tax bracket was 70%, then it came down to 28% at the end of his presidency. Dramatic cut in marginal tax rates, strong economic growth, lots of jobs created. And in 3 years, he turned the country around. One of the challenges that this administration has, that year 3 of Reagan, who was coming out of a recession and double-digit inflation 2 years in a row, he'd undid the job loss and the inflation, and in his 3rd year, he created 4 million jobs. We're now ending the 3rd year of this administration, and we didn't create 4 million jobs. So the approach that Reagan took in terms of rather than spending more money, reducing taxes, worked. What happened with the stimulus package recently was they put $800 billion in government spending and expected that to create jobs. Now the theory went as follows. We're going to take $1 from somebody who earned it, either in taxes, we just take it, or we borrow it, and then we give $1 to somebody who's politically connected. Okay? And we now argue there's now more money in the room. That is Keynesian economics. As a matter of fact, they 2.14 times as much money when I take your $1 and give it to Fred than if I'd left it in your hands. If Obama, Reid, and Pelosi had stood at one side of a lake and each dipped a bucket into the lake and then walked around to the other side of the lake and in front of the MSNBC cameras poured the water back in and explained they were stimulating the lake to great depths. Don't laugh. We're going to do this 800 billion times. then it'll work. That was the theory, okay? I mean, I went to Harvard. They taught me this, Keynesian economics. There's a magical multiplier effect that if the government spends your money rather than you spend your money, it's better for the economy. It's better for the government. Anyway, it's laughable. It didn't work, surprisingly. We have about 1.5 million more people not working today than before that interesting experiment. Things got worse, not better, with each of the projects that were done. Where are we going from here? We just spent a year where the Democrats wanted to raise taxes $2.5 trillion to bring spending up over the next decade, to bring spending up towards the higher taxes up towards the higher level of spending that they'd set. And they wanted to make the 25% of the economy the new normal. With the nationalization of health care, with Obamacare, you're talking about another 5 to 8% of the economy on top of that going to the government. They want to jump the government up to be French levels of spending as a percentage of the economy, European levels of spending. The modern Republican Party said we're not doing that. And then there was a question, and it was spoken to a year ago when Alan Simpson, former Republican senator from Wyoming, spoke. He thought if you give the Democrats a tax increase, then they'll give you spending restraint, and you add them together, and that reduces the debt. Okay, 1982, the Democrats went to Reagan, and they said, we will give you $3 of spending cuts for every $1 of tax increase. And Reagan took the deal. It was supposed to be $550 billion of spending cuts over the next 5 years, and 170, one-third of that, tax increases. The tax increases happened. The tax increases were real. And adjusting for inflation, which was going wildly up and down, with real dollars, spending went up by $170 billion, not down by 3 times that. So taxes went up and spending went up from what had been expected, okay, from what had been projected, not just up from zero, but up from what had been expected. So not only did the higher taxes not buy you $3 of spending restraint, it didn't buy you any spending reduction. What it bought you was the Democrats said, let's see, we tricked them once, they give us $170 billion, let's spend that plus spend more because we know we can trick them again. And in 1990, they went to George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41, and they said to President Bush, if you give us $1 of tax increase, we will give you $2 of spending restraint, $2 of spending cuts. He was a cheaper date. And his $2 were as imaginary as Reagan's were. The spending and the tax increases were real. The tax increases were permanent. You're still paying them right now. And spending went up, not down at all, went up from all projections. So we've twice tried this idea that we come in, have a grand compromise, raise taxes, cut spending. The challenge is that what people forget is the two parties want to do two different things. Republicans want to spend less, and the Democrats want to spend more. The argument is overspending. The taxes are what they backfill the spending with. So when Republicans want to spend less and Democrats want to spend more, there isn't a compromise. Somebody wins, somebody loses. I mean, these are going in opposite directions. Obama wants to raise taxes to spend more. Republicans want to not raise taxes to spend less. The fight is over spending, not about the deficit. Matter of fact, one hardly mentions the deficit now that it's 5 times what it was when Reagan had it, and that was a reason for raising taxes when Reagan was there. The deficit is used as an argument for raising taxes, but the goal is to spend more money. So that's the argument we had for a year. I argued with Alan Simpson and others, testified at the Obama Commission, and I said, guys, if you raise taxes, there will be no spending cuts. If, however, you take the position that the modern Republican Party has, which is we're not raising taxes, we're going to cut spending, then you'll get spending cuts. And we're now 1 year out. What happened? No tax increase, $2.5 trillion in spending restraint. Okay, passed into law. A lot of whining. The whining was the Congress didn't do anything. Yeah, it did. It cut spending, $2.5 trillion. When left of center politicians say the commission failed, the committee failed. No, the committee didn't fail. The committee itself got us $1.2 trillion in a sequester in less spending. That's only failing if your real goal was to raise taxes, which it was, which is why they refer to a $2.5 trillion spending cut as a failure, since they wanted a tax increase, not the spending cut. The left lost, the Republicans won, the tax and spenders lost, the people who wanted to reduce spending won. However, it was not unadulterated victory. The modern Republican Party passed a bill in the House, the Ryan bill, budget, which would have cut spending by $6 trillion over the next decade. $6 trillion. They only got $2.5 trillion. So that's a compromise. We didn't get everything we wanted. We wanted to spend a lot less than Obama wanted to spend. We only got to spend $2.5 trillion less over the decade than Obama wanted to spend. So sadly, that was a compromise. The pledge itself and the purpose of the pledge, it's a written pledge, 2 witnesses, you sign it, it's to the people of your state and to your district, as a congressman, a senator, a president, state legislator, governor. No net tax increase. Tax reform's fine. You want to raise some taxes, cut some other taxes. You want to do tax reform again like 86, reduce rates, broaden the base, get rid of annoying, corrupt tax deductions that were put in by some clever lobbyist somewhere. Fine. Do it revenue neutral. The pledge makes sure that tax reform is never again used as a Trojan horse for higher taxes. The pledge is what makes tax reform possible, and I believe inevitable in the near future, because the American people will trust Congress to go into a dark room and make changes if they know that they're never raising taxes. And from 94 was the first time we got basically everybody running for Congress as a Republican, running House and Senate, took the pledge. Ever since then, we've been at ivory soap percentages of Republicans who've made a commitment not to raise taxes. And again, the pledge is a commitment that as long as I'm a congressman or a senator or a president, I won't raise taxes. Now, if I run for a different office, run for state legislature, and move to run for Congress, you take the pledge again because you have a different constituency. No net tax increase. What it means is I'm going to go and fight for spending reform. And as you know from Ohio and the other states this last year, those states that raised taxes didn't reform government. Those states that refused to raise taxes did reform government. We saw spending restraint and government reform only when tax increases are taken off the table. Tax increases are what politicians do instead of governing. Tax increases are when politicians say, everything we've been doing for the last 50 years, we'll just do all of it the same. We don't even look at it to see if it works. We're not going to ask any questions about what works, what doesn't. We take all that, and if anyone has a new idea, we'll go get more money to pay for that too. We're not going to scrape any barnacles off the boat. We're going to go get new barnacles on the boat. And they wonder why the boat doesn't work. And so they just accumulate spending programs and accumulate taxes to pay for them. When you say we're not raising taxes, you force a conversation about spending reform and spending restraint. And that's been the advantage. It also makes for a much more honest conversation. The reason I had the pledge be something that people write, again, Senator Reid of Nevada doesn't seem to understand this, but the pledge is not to me. It's to the American people. It kind of says so in the pledge if you read it. And it's a public pledge. Unlike some of the commitments that Harry Reid is used to, where you go in to talk to the organized labor and you promise them things in a quiet room, or you talk to the trial lawyers and you promise them things in a secret room, this is a public commitment. You tell everybody in the state, send me to Washington, I'm not raising your taxes. That is my commitment to all of you. And the reason it's enforcing, and we had a little help here from George Herbert Walker Bush, who had a very successful presidency, managed the collapse of the Soviet Union without a lot of blood on the floor, drove Iraq out of Kuwait, didn't get stuck occupying the place for a decade. Many, many successes. One small flaw is that he raised taxes, and he lost the next election. Nobody's life is a complete waste. Some people serve as bad examples. And when we bring up little baby Republicans, we say, see that? Don't do that. And that's one of the reasons why voters can trust that when somebody takes the pledge, they really mean it. Because they know that the voters know, that the elected official knows, that the voters know, that the elected official knows. Everybody knows that they would be very disappointed if you were to have lied your way into office. Now, there are still politicians who will verbally say they won't raise taxes and then lie about it. Former Governor Warner of Virginia said he'd never raise taxes, right in, started raising taxes. The whole series of guys, but they won't put it in writing. To this, I got to talk to a shrink about how this is. This is a number of guys will run for office, promise verbally not to, but the ones who promise verbally not to and won't put it in writing, you can bet your bottom dollar they're heading right to a tax increase the first time that looks interesting. The ones who put it in writing have really made a commitment. I'm not going to do that. And it's self-enforcing. I get a lot of silly press questions. Well, what would you do to somebody? I said, I didn't have to put out a press release when George Herbert Walker Bush broke his pledge. What do you mean, what am I going to do? The American people said, wait a minute. And they unelected a guy who, again, had benefited, other than the tax increase, he'd governed fairly well. And the end of the Cold War was a lot less unpleasant than I could have imagined how it might have unfolded. But that was a politically fatal decision to raise taxes. So we have a party that won't raise taxes, that wants to reduce spending, and we have a party that wants to spend more and raise taxes. We're going to spend the next 10 years having that argument. And I think as we look ahead, we got 3 presidential elections and 5 congressional and Senate elections, and it's in this next decade that we will have sorted out whether we end up with a European welfare state or back to a more limited government.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a forum featuring Grover Norquist, President of Americans for Tax Reform. We will return to Mr. Norquist in a moment for the traditional City Club question and answer period. We encourage you to formulate your questions now. Please remember to keep them brief. We remind you all that you're welcome to attend City Club forums, and we hope everyone listening and everyone here will join the City Club if you're not already a member. We could really use your support, so please do join the City Club. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. We're pleased to welcome guests today at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, Friends of Jack Boyle, the Cuyahoga County Republican Party, Westlake 912 Project, and the West Shore Tea Party. Thank you all for joining us. We're also very pleased to welcome students who are here today as part of the City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Student Fund. With us today are students from Montessori High School and Collinwood High School. Will the students please stand and be recognized? Now we'd like to return to our speaker for a traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from all of you. Holding the microphones today, we have City Club Program Director Carrie Miller and Special Initiatives Coordinator Phil Williams. First question, please.
Mr. Norquist, prior to 1927, the federal government had no role in disaster relief nationally. Prior to 1936, there was no Social Security. And prior to about 1960, there was no provision of medical services through what we now call Medicare by the federal government. In your view of what is the proper role of government and what should be a limited government, are any of these 3 programs part of that proper role?
I think one of the things to look at is the Ryan budget, the roadmap, the Ryan budget was actually put forward and passed in the House of Representatives a year ago, this spring. It got all but 4 of the Republican votes. 2 didn't think it was tough enough, and 2 were confused. But it was the modern, it was pretty much close to unanimous within the Republican Party. And what he did on the issue of Medicare, for instance, is built on the success of welfare reform. One of the things that folks understand that Bill Clinton did correctly was that he signed the Welfare Reform Act the 3rd time it passed, vetoed it twice, but then he signed it, so he gets credit for signing it. And that said, we're going to block grant out to the states the money that we were giving you for welfare, and rather than have it come as cash with many thousands of strings telling you what to do and not to do, states will compete with each other to provide the best government at the lowest cost, and we dropped about the number of people trapped in welfare dependency dropped significantly. It is, were you to do the same thing, go to block grant, food stamps, Medicaid, all the means-tested programs, are block granted under Ryan, and that saves, just by allowing those to grow with inflation and then giving the states the ability to decide how to run each of them, it saves taxpayers $750 billion over the next decade, a rather significant amount, again, by following the success of welfare reform. So I think what we need to do, the government didn't get built up in any sort of serious thought-out manner that followed somebody wins an election here and then they just throw stuff together. I think we should spend more time trying to figure out how to reform government than thought was put into how to grow it. And I think the Ryan Plan, in a number of ways, specifically in block granting all the welfare programs, is a really good step in that direction. So looking at what programs need to be at the national level rather than at the state level is an interesting debate. I think as we go through this, you talk about government services. Let me suggest a government service, because some people say, well, what government service would you be willing to do without? Which presupposes that every dollar spent by the government is a government service. Average person in the normal economy, if you add their pay, their pension, and their benefits all together, average is $60,000 in this country. For state and local government workers, the average is $80,000 a year. So the average state and local worker makes $20,000 more than the average private sector worker. And then if you work for the federal government, pension, benefits, pay together, it's $120,000. So $20,000 more for state and local workers, $60,000 more for federal government workers. There are about 14 million state and local workers, so multiply 14 million state and local workers times $20,000 additional pay beyond what you would expect, and you have some sense of the rather large quantity of money that taxpayer could save just by going to pay equity between the private sector and the public sector. And that doesn't even get into questions about how many days a year public sector workers work, the hours they work, and the advantage they have in being less likely to be laid off. So that's a huge chunk of cash. Federal, state together, it's somewhere over $400 billion a year in overpayments to government workers compared to the people who pay their bills. This is not Robin Hood. This is Sheriff of Nottingham. Okay, the government runs a huge transfer from the less well-off to the more well-off in those programs.
Yes, Mr. Norquist,
Yeah.
With regard to your conversation regarding income and wage rates, because we now have lower wage rates and there's a reduction in the amount of disposable income, do you think that your policies will become a tougher pill to swallow for the average American?
No, I think that people look at why we're in trouble. You saw two government-created institutions, Fannie and Freddie Mac, go out and upend an entire industry in terms of home ownership values and destroy a lot of equity. We saw $800 billion of stimulus spending, $1 trillion in additional domestic discretionary spending. Remember, they're always telling us, oh, there's no money in domestic discretionary spending, it's all in entitlements. Well, Obama, Reid, and Pelosi increased domestic discretionary spending by $1 trillion over the next decade in the first 2 months they were in office. Okay, $1 trillion increase. That's not culling back from what we had. They added $1 trillion to it. So there are real dollars to be had in domestic discretionary spending. Bush put some of them there, and let's not have any misunderstanding that I am in any way, by pointing out the hyperdrive of overspending of the last 3 years, not critical and very unhappy about the drift upward which continued, which happened during the Bush years on spending. One was bigger and faster and harder and all that. They're both moving in the wrong direction. and both were a mistake, and both are expensive. So I think the argument that we need, if we're going to create more jobs, how did Reagan do it, and how did his third year work? How's Obama, Reid, and Pelosi done it? How's their third year work? Throughout history, which countries, which times in our history have we done better than others? The 1920s, we took the top tax rate from 70 to 25. Then Hoover took it back up to 75. How'd that work? We had more free trade, and Hoover decided to have protectionism. Hoover increased spending, government spending 62%. How'd that work? Not any better than it did this time. Spending more and taxing more didn't work for Hoover, and didn't work for FDR, who continued it for 10 years. After that, the economy, they think it maybe bottomed out in 38. I'm not sure we want to wait 10 years to bottom out from a government extended recession. And we need to look at what works. And what doesn't work is spending more money and raising taxes. What does work is freedom. And that's nice. Freedom is good.
Hi, Grover. Good
Yeah.
afternoon.
Hi.
The Tea Party movement, 912 organizations, we know largely responsible for the Republican wins in 2010. And I'd ask that you comment on that in your answer. But my question is that on the other side, purportedly organic grassroots activity has taken shape in the form of the Occupy movement. And my question really is, can the Occupy movement sustain and be a force politically like the Tea Party and 912, or will Obama and others regret embracing and even fomenting that movement?
Yeah. The Tea Party movement is probably the fifth significant wave of immigration into the modern Republican Party. The first that I'd point to is the Goldwater campaign of 63, 64. All these new people came into the Republican Party. People started Republican parties where there hadn't been any in the past. They brought new and more active people into the longtime Republican Party in the Midwest and Northeast. So that was a wave. And you remember the New York Times explained the Republican Party was destroying itself by bringing all these extremists into the party. And then 2 years later, we picked up quite a few House seats and then won the presidency. Then you had the traditional values, pro-family movement, Phyllis Schlafly type movements in the early 70s, which brought a lot of people into the modern Republican Party who had been what were now called Reagan Democrats or big city ethnic Catholic, BCECs, that were pushed out by the modern Democratic Party but then brought in by some individual leaders. And again, a lot of Republicans said, I don't know about this. Then you had the so-called religious right, Falwell and others, who were scared in the late 70s by two decisions that President Carter made. One was to use the IRS to go after Christian private schools, and the other was to the FCC to go after Christian radio stations. And the Christian radio stations are a fairly good way of communicating with their listenership about threats to themselves. And it created a wave of activity that came into the Republican Party, advantaged Reagan, and Reagan won. You then had in 88, when Pat Robertson ran with a slightly different group of people that he attracted, about 2 million people came into his campaign movement and then came into the modern Republican Party. And again, the establishment Republicans tut-tutting at the door about these people don't dress very well, and they seem to quote Leviticus in the middle of meetings. And, so there was unhappiness. And then you had the Ron Paul people coming into the Republican Party and the Tea Party movement most recently. And each of these waves was met with some hostility, complete hostility by the establishment press, warning us against having more people in our party. But also by a lot of establishment Republicans who were going, I don't know about this. I mean, somehow I don't think that at Walmart, when they see many, many more people showing up at the store, they go, oh my goodness, these people are parking in the parking lot and they're buying our stuff and we're going to have to get more stuff and this is awful, all these new customers. Walmart recognizes new customers as helpful, and intelligent political parties recognize new people coming in and new energy and so on as helpful. And it's our town Republican committee meeting has always had 20 people, and I've always been chairman, and Martha, you've always been the secretary, and now we got 75 people in the room. I don't think they're going to reelect us, So there's some stuff when new people come in, but I think it's been very good for the Republican Party. The Republican Party won the 2010 election, when Speaker Boehner kept all the Minority Leader Boehner kept all the Republicans together to vote against the stimulus package, even though people were offered incredible small b bribes. How'd you like to spend some of it? Give us your vote, and you too can touch all this lovely cash. Republicans all held no. They voted against government takeover of health care. So when he held the minority together, when people could have been scared or thought this was the way the world was going, then when the Tea Party came up, the Tea Party could look and say, that's a changed Republican Party from 2, 4, and 10 years ago that we could support. So the Tea Party movement did it, but if the Republicans had not, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in Boehner's state, but because Boehner did this, and he held the party together against all the blandishments and cash incentives to go the other way. That's what made the party welcoming to and attractive to the Tea Party movement, which was upset about all the spending. And Occupy Wall Street is, I think, extremely helpful because it irritates people and they block traffic, and I hope they keep going because they lose voters for the other team.
Mr. Norquist, thank you very much for coming to the City Club of Cleveland.
Absolutely.
You've described yourself as a boring white bread Methodist. So I'm sure as a Christian, you are very familiar with the many references in the Bible to help those in need, such as Galatians 6:2, which says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the laws of Christ. Taxes are the way we as Americans collectively help those in need. At least some people believe that.
Come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm glad we're here at the City Club so we can have this talk or this debate. Yet you decry the notion of a safety net and have said that Washington should stay out of the lives of those in need, despite the fact that according to the International Monetary Fund...
That's not a quote.
I've said that I've seen that you have been said to say that. The International Monetary Fund of the U.S. Has said that the United States has the highest single GDP in 2011. So, and you're proud of your pledge, which one Republican Congressman, Frank Wolf of Virginia, has said has helped engender a political process that is tragically shackled in an ideological gridlock. And here's my question. Doesn't your pledge and your gridlock and the gridlock that it's caused fly in the face of your faith's pronouncement to help those in need?
No. The idea that size of government helps poor people would be news to people who lived in Poland or the Soviet Union or China a few years ago, or any. The larger the state, the less cheerful it is to be a poor person in it. Because the state tends to take things from people. It doesn't. It's not Santa Claus. The state can't give you anything it didn't take from you. But the argument that somehow the Bible argues that Rome should be in charge of charity is actually nowhere in the Bible. Jesus actually speaks to separating Caesar from what you do, render unto Caesar those things that are Caesar's. And so, no, charity is a very important thing. But putting a gun to somebody's head and taking their money is not an act of charity. And then giving the money to somebody else, okay? That's not charity. That's theft, and then whatever you do with it. This government does not help poor people in a way that I think it could, which is to give them more liberty. As an example, the Davis-Bacon Act, which was passed in the late 1920s, early 1930s, deliberately designed to keep African Americans from getting jobs in the North in federally funded construction projects. And this is from the people who, Mr. Davis and Mr. Bacon on the floor of the legislature, explaining that was the purpose. And it deliberately increases the cost of federally government-run programs, keeps people out of training programs, out of new opportunities, and raises the cost of every highway and building the federal government builds by 25 to 30%, making us all poorer and worse off. So I think that the government should first make a list of those things it does to damage the economy and the opportunities for all people before it pretends that if it takes $1 from one person, then it can magically create $2 somewhere else. And no, the Bible is not an argument for phalangism or statism or fascism or collective corporatism, and with the government running people's lives. I mean, the Old Testament's all about how you don't want a king. He'll take 20% of your earnings, okay? 20%, that king would be pretty good, right? But wait a minute, that would be crazy. A king would take 20%, and he'd have a draft and a whole bunch of other things that kings would do. So no, I think I mean, my politics is driven by a commitment to liberty and to the Constitution, but it's completely consistent with being a Christian and a Methodist, and that's why I don't appreciate the government doing the amount of damage it does to people by interfering with economic growth. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. We also have, because he put himself in the newspaper the other day, the rich liberal guy from Nebraska. Which one? Buffett. Yes, Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, who invests in insurance companies and doesn't want to abolish the death tax because one of the reasons people buy life insurance is to get around the death tax. And there's a guy for you. Anyway, apart from being corrupt and cynical, he also likes to pretend to be charitable. He says, I think the government should raise taxes I'd like to pay more in taxes. So you can find on our website, atr.org, the letter I sent him explaining where you can go on the IRS website and find the place to write a check. And Steve Scalise, Republican congressman from Louisiana, has actually introduced legislation to implement the Buffett line, not buffet line, the Buffett line, which is a line under it says, the IRS 1040 statement says, you owe us this. Pay up, okay? That's $1,000 or whatever the number is. And then under it says, if you think the government can spend your money better than you can, add more dollars, okay? So that Warren Buffett and all his little hypocritical, phony, rich liberals who pretend, you know the guy in the bar who says, let me at him, I'll be pretending somebody's holding him back, and you look at him, nobody's holding you back. What are you talking about? Warren Buffett's, I want to pay more in taxes. Warren, you little hypocrite, pay him now. Write a check now, if you'd like. But he doesn't. He wants credit for his charitable impulses, and then he wants to pretend that somebody's keeping him from that. Warren Buffett has announced he's giving all his money to charities and 501c3s. None of it will be taken by the death tax. Okay? So Warren Buffett has told you that he knows that if he has $1, he also owes quite a bit of money in back taxes, which he's not paying. Okay, that's another subject. And fighting the government over what he owes the government. But the rest of you people should send in more money because you would just fritter away on the kids and stuff like that. And whereas the government would wisely. He believes he can spend his money better than the government. He believes the government can spend your money better than you. So when he talks about the importance of you paying more in tax, he's just actually letting you know he really has contempt for you and your family and your life because you waste money and the government would spend it better than you, but he knows that he's smarter and he doesn't give the government any money at all, that he doesn't pry it out of his hands. He could decide when I pass away I'm going to leave it all to the government, but he knows, okay, you have some idea of what liberals really think of the government? He doesn't think there's a government program in the world. He's never written a check to a government program. He doesn't think they're worthwhile. That's a chilling indictment of the state when somebody who claims to support it wouldn't write a check himself. You ever heard a liberal say, I'm going to give money to the Red Cross, and I'm going to give money to the EPA? They never do this, okay? They never write a check to the food stamp program, okay? They don't. So they really let you know what they truly think about the competency and efficacy of statism when they do that. That Maimonides, the Talmudic scholar from Spain, 1200s, had 8 levels of charity. People who give secretly, people who give asking nothing, and all the way down. Okay, then down towards people who give but are grumpy about it. I've redone his list and come up with a 9th one, which is people who say they'd like to give, but then come up with a phony excuse about why they won't. That's Warren Buffett. So he's on the 9th level of Maimonides' levels of charity. Yeah.
Just a short question,
yeah.
Mr. Norquist. In the early part of your talk, you addressed the right to be left alone as a tenet of your center-right group. Does that extend to a woman with an unwanted pregnancy who might want to be left alone?
Sure. That's a very interesting question. It usually comes earlier in the day. And And that's why you have Republicans who are pro-choice on abortion and Democrats who are pro-life, because it's not really the same issue. What you have is, do you think there are two people or one person? If there are two people, a woman and a baby, they both deserve to be protected. If there's only one person, she deserves to be left alone. And so the distinction you have, I mean, I don't know anybody who says, I see two people and it's okay to kill one. And I don't know anyone who says, I see one person, make her have a baby. What you have there is a decision that people are arguing about is how many people are there. And once you've decided how many people are there, people come on one side or the other on that subject. So it doesn't fall into the category in the same way, but certainly within the center-right, what you would have unanimity on is not have federal funding of a project that a large percentage of the American people finds unpleasant and immoral. So you ought not to be forcing people with tax dollars to pay for something. Second conversation is, should it be legal? And that's a question of how many people there are and whether they have rights.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to Grover Norquist, President of Americans for Tax Reform. Thank you, Mr. Norquist. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.